And then, of course, there's Paul George. We can't ignore the situation involving Paul George. I'm here to tell you, Max, one of the nicest dudes you'll ever want to meet in your life. Impossible to root against. He is a star in this league, but nevertheless, boy, did he not show up. It was Brick City. It was a straight choke job on his part as well. And what the biggest thing about Paul George that he needs to pay attention to, Paul George is in danger. Are you ready for this, Max? He's in danger of becoming the second coming of Dwight Howard. Remember, Dwight Howard was the man in Orlando, just like Paul George was the man in Indiana. He wanted to leave. He goes to L.A., he ends up going to Houston, and then before long, he's a journeyman, Washington, Charlotte, etc. Because the star that he once was, he was no more. And so because of that, everybody says they harken back to that. He should have never left Orlando. That was an ideal situation for him. They built the franchise around him, even though he didn't win the chip. They got to the finals in 2009. And now Dwight Howard is a role player, even though I think he's doing an exceptional job in LA in a reserve role. And I think he's going to play a big role in this series along with JaVale McGee and Anthony Davis, triple teaming, basically throwing a three-headed monster at Jokic on the defensive side of the floor. But in the end, what it comes down to is that if you're Paul George, okay, you win Indiana, then you win OKC. Now you're in LA with the Clippers. And Max just said in order for this team to get the parts that it needs, even though I don't agree with you, you're talking about how you'd have to move Paul George in order to do that. So I think all of those things elevates the level of incentive. I think you keep the Clippers as is, stand pat. They were embarrassed. They're highly motivated. You anticipate that a pandemic won't stall next season, that you'll move full steam ahead. And I think you keep them together for one last run. Remember, both Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, 2-1. 2 years with a third-year option for each player. They could have signed for a 4-year deal or whatever. Neither of them did it. They can opt out after this upcoming season. This season could be on the line. If you're Ballmer, I think you give everybody one more shot, letting them know I will clean house in a heartbeat, and y'all will be gone from Tinseltown if y'all don't get it done next season.
There is a lot to unpack here, from many of the things that Stephen A. said to things that I think we need to just discuss about the Clippers and Paul George in general. Before we get to that, guys, I wanted to let you know I was successful in acquiring a PS5, and I was able to secure an additional PS5, and I'm giving it away on my Twitter account. A link to that's going to be in the description down below. It's my way of thanking you guys for quite possibly one of my greatest weeks on YouTube in my entire career. So thank you guys so much from the bottom of my heart. If you haven't yet, please smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. It really does wonders to help my YouTube channel grow. I do this full time and I don't mind pumping out daily videos so long as you take a second to smash that like button until it turns blue. If you've seen a couple of my videos at this point and you're starting to think, hey, this Mike guy is not that bad of an individual, go ahead and subscribe. And if you happen to think, oh my God, I'm in love with this Mike guy, then hit that notification bell. Of course, I'm going to live stream on Twitch at the conclusion of this video or at the conclusion of tonight's playoff game. Now that we got all that out of the way, cue the intro. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? Guys, I've had it. We've done it over and over and over again. We let Paul George and Kawhi Leonard have it, and even in my video yesterday, I even let Paul George have it for not holding himself fully accountable. But some of these narratives I'm seeing, primarily the one I saw from Stephen A. earlier in this video, just drove me absolutely bonkers. So if you haven't already, please take a moment to comment in the comments section down below whether you agree with Stephen A. or not. Do you think Paul George is on the cusp of becoming the next Dwight Howard, in the sense that he was in a good position on the Indiana Pacers? The Pacers moved on from him and they ended up being just fine without him. He goes to the OKC Thunder, isn't able to make it through the playoffs with the OKC Thunder, and then gets traded to the Clippers and completely chokes, despite being one of the favorites of making it to the NBA Finals, and he's in the current situation he's in today. Because there's a lot that Stephen A. just said that I really just don't agree with. For example, that last bit that he said about Steve Ballmer going up to the Clippers and saying, hey, I'm going to give you one more chance to run it back. Steve Ballmer doesn't have any leverage in this situation. He can't draft any young players until 2023. How is he supposed to rebuild a Clippers core that's completely devoid of draft picks until 2023 if both Paul George and Kawhi Leonard walk? They're all in on this arrangement, and if you ask me, it's a good arrangement. It's a great team. I do think they should stand pat. I feel like they shouldn't even just give it 1 year. I think they need to give it 2 or 3 more years until it's glaringly obvious why the Clippers failed. Just like the previous generation of Clippers, just like the Lob City Clippers. Figure out why it's not working and then make it work if it's possible, because you're already invested in Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. Now that I got that out of the way, we need to discuss the bigger root of the problem. This comparison makes absolutely zero sense whatsoever. And this is coming from a guy that kind of felt backstabbed by Dwight Howard when he left the Lakers for the Houston Rockets. Because you see, Dwight Howard got extremely unlucky. He was extremely, there's players that are really ahead of their times. Well, there are also players that are extremely behind their times. And we actually got the pleasure of watching Dwight Howard dominate in a generation where his talent was the most sought after in the mid 2000s to the late 2000s, to the point where he's considered to be a huge liability offensively when he's on the floor. Because the reason why Dwight Howard fell off is because the NBA shifted away from the traditional center. You see, in the mid to late 2000s, there weren't that many three-point shooters. Bigs weren't expected to hit the three. As a matter of fact, the only 2 bigs that pop into my mind, or 3 bigs that pop into my mind that were able to hit the three, is Channing Frye, Dirk Nowitzki, and Andrea Bargnani. So right away, you could throw that take in the gutter because Paul George's position currently is at a premium. As a matter of fact, if you want to assemble a team right now, ideally you want to build around 2 two-way star forwards, and that's what the Clippers have. If you trade Paul George to any contending NBA team, I think he would be very successful. I feel like the problem lies in where Paul George is tasked with the primary playmaking responsibilities of his team. Which brings me to my next statement. It's time for us to lay off of Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, but mainly Paul George, because Kawhi Leonard didn't get nearly as much hate as Paul George. You can make a ton of excuses for why Paul George performed poorly, whether it's off the court reasons, which we've covered in previous videos, and I'll leave those videos at the end screen of this video if you missed it, to the fact that I honestly think that the Los Angeles Clippers are a playmaking point guard away from being successful. I literally think that they're possibly a Rajon Rondo or a Ricky Rubio away from being able to do some serious damage. I feel like if they are able to get some sort of system going, then they'll finally be successful. Because if you look at the history of Kawhi Leonard's success, he was in a motion offense when he was in San Antonio, and when he got traded to the Toronto Raptors, it just so happened that Nick Nurse decided to run a very similar type of offense and build it around Kawhi Leonard. And that worked, but whenever you give the ball to Kawhi Leonard and force him to isolate, and the same with Paul George, well, you're not going to get the greatest results all the time. Isolation ball isn't the most effective brand of basketball, and we see that to an extreme with James Harden. Whenever James Harden isos, he's probably the most successful isolation basketball player in the history of the NBA, and Jimmy Highroller made a fantastic video on it. I really highly recommend you watch it because it'll change your perception of James Harden. But the beauty of James Harden is we got to see what happens when you take the greatest isolation basketball player in NBA history and try to surround him with stars. And the result is, unless if you do it properly, or you provide him with an additional playmaker, or you supplement that isolation ball with some pick and roll basketball, he's not going to be that successful. So it's a very simple solution to fix the Los Angeles Clippers. The only change that needs to be made is they need to bring in a point guard that could handle the primary duties as a ball handler and playmaker, or they need to change their offensive system. I think everything else is fine, and as a result of that, I really hope we can move on from the Paul George situation. Guys, let me know in the comment section down below, who do you agree with? Do you agree with me? Do you agree with Stephen A? Because I really thought that his take was by far the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. As a matter of fact, I do feel like there's a player that's in danger of becoming the next Dwight Howard, and that would be Russell Westbrook. And the reason for that is, and this is not to hate on Russell Westbrook, it's because Russell Westbrook's type of player is also becoming a liability in NBA offenses. A player that completely vacuums offensive possessions, isn't capable of playing off the ball to a star player, and can't hit open threes. Yeah, that's a little bit of a liability. And I hate to say this because I'm a big Russell Westbrook fan. He went to my alma mater at UCLA, and I hope he comes back next year and being able to magically shoot three-pointers. But that's my counter argument to Stephen A. Smith. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think, and if you made it to the end of this video, comment "Leave Paul George alone." I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.